I remember the exact moment it started happening again. It was 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in March, and I'd been lying in bed for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling and listening to the radiator make those metallic clicking sounds that old apartments are famous for. I'd finally started to drift off when I felt that familiar, terrifying sensation of my consciousness snapping awake while my body remained completely motionless. The first thing you notice during sleep paralysis isn't the inability to move, it's the weight. There's this crushing pressure on your chest, like someone sitting on you with their full body weight, making every breath a conscious struggle. Your lungs feel compressed, and you have to fight for each shallow gasp of air. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, but I couldn't lift even a finger to touch my chest and confirm what I was feeling. My eyes were the only part of me that seemed to work properly. I could move them left and right, up and down, but my eyelids felt impossibly heavy. The room looked exactly as it should, my dresser against the far wall, the pile of clothes I'd left on the chair, the faint glow of streetlights filtering through my blinds. Everything was normal, which somehow made what came next even more terrifying. That's when I sensed it. Something was in the room with me. I couldn't turn my head to look directly, but in my peripheral vision, I could make out a dark shape standing near the foot of my bed. It was tall and thin, unnaturally so, like a shadow that had somehow gained substance and decided to stand upright. The figure didn't move, didn't make any sound, but I could feel its attention focused entirely on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The breathing came next. Not my own labored breathing, but something else entirely. It was slow and deliberate, almost mechanical in its rhythm. In, out, in, out. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the room with this wet, rattling quality that made me think of someone breathing through fluid. Each exhale seemed to last forever, and I found myself waiting for the next inhale with growing dread. I tried to scream, tried to call out for help, but my vocal cords were as paralyzed as the rest of my body. The most I could manage was a barely audible whimper that got lost in my throat. I attempted to move my fingers, my toes, anything, focusing all my mental energy on just twitching one small part of my body. Nothing. I was completely trapped inside myself, a prisoner in my own flesh. The figure began to move closer. I couldn't see it directly, but I could sense its approach like a change in air pressure. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms even though I couldn't see them. My breathing became even more shallow and rapid, each breath a monumental effort against whatever invisible force was pressing down on my chest. It stopped right beside my bed. I could feel its presence looming over me, though I still couldn't turn my head to look. The breathing sound was louder now, more distinct, and I realized with horror that it was matching my own rhythm. When I breathed in, it breathed in. When I exhaled, it exhaled. It was like having a grotesque mirror that reflected only sound, and the synchronization felt deeply wrong, invasive in a way that made my stomach turn. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time becomes meaningless when you're trapped like that. The figure just stood there, breathing with me, watching me struggle. I could feel its eyes on me, though I couldn't see them. There was something patient about its presence, like it had all the time in the world, and was enjoying every second of my terror. I tried to focus on breaking free, using every technique I'd read about online. I concentrated on moving just one finger, putting all my mental energy into that single digit. I visualized myself sitting up, shouting, running from the room. I even tried to cough, thinking maybe I could force some sound out of my throat. Nothing worked. My body remained as still and unresponsive as a corpse. The breathing changed. Instead of matching my rhythm, the figure began to breathe slower, deeper. Each inhale seemed to pull something from the room, making the air feel thinner. I started to panic, convinced that it was somehow stealing my oxygen, suffocating me through this bizarre breathing synchronization. My heart rate spiked. and I could feel sweat breaking out across my forehead despite the cold temperature. That's when I noticed something else. The figure wasn't just breathing, it was whispering. The words were so quiet I couldn't make them out at first, just a constant, low murmur that rode underneath the breathing sounds. As my ears adjusted, I began to pick out fragments. My name, my address, things about my life that no one should know. Personal details, embarrassing moments, fears I'd never shared with anyone. The whispers grew more distinct, and I realized it was reciting my thoughts. Not just random thoughts, but specific fears and anxieties I'd been wrestling with lately. It knew about my job stress, my relationship problems, the financial difficulties I'd been hiding from my family. It was like having my entire inner monologue read back to me by something that had no right to know those things. I wanted to cry, but even my tear ducts seemed paralyzed. The helplessness was overwhelming. Here was this thing, this presence, violating my most private thoughts while I lay there unable to move or speak or even close my eyes to shut it out. It felt like being mentally dissected while fully conscious. The figure leaned closer. I couldn't see it move, but I could feel it getting nearer, its breath getting warmer against my skin. The whispers became more insistent, more personal. It began describing things it wanted to do, places it wanted to take me, how long it had been watching me sleep. The voice was neither male nor female, but something in between that sounded like it was coming from damaged vocal cords. I focused every ounce of my willpower on breaking free. I imagined myself as a warrior, as someone strong and capable of fighting back. I visualized light filling the room, banishing whatever dark thing had attached itself to me. I prayed, even though I wasn't particularly religious, calling out to any deity that might be listening to please make this stop. Slowly, gradually, I began to feel sensation returning to my extremities. It started as a tingling in my fingers and toes, like blood flow returning to a limb that had fallen asleep. The tingling spread up my arms and legs, and I realized I could feel the sheets against my skin again. The crushing weight on my chest began to lift, allowing me to take deeper breaths. The figure seemed to sense that I was breaking free. The whispers became more urgent, almost angry. The breathing sound changed to something that sounded almost like growling. I could feel its frustration as my paralysis began to fade, like it was losing its hold over me and didn't want to let go. With enormous effort, I managed to twitch my right index finger. It was the smallest movement, barely perceptible, but it felt like a victory. I focused on that finger, moving it again, then trying to move my whole hand. The sensation was like learning to walk again, each tiny movement requiring tremendous concentration and effort. The whispers stopped suddenly. The breathing sound faded away. I could sense the figure retreating, pulling back from the bed, though I still couldn't turn my head to look. The temperature in the room began to return to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere that had filled the space gradually lifted. Finally, I was able to move my head. I turned it slowly, fearfully, toward where I'd sensed the figure standing. Nothing was there. The room was empty, normal, exactly as it should be. But I could still feel the residual presence, like the way a room smells of smoke long after someone has finished smoking. I sat up quickly, my heart still pounding, and reached for the lamp beside my bed. The sudden flood of light was comforting, chasing away the shadows and making everything feel real and normal again. I looked around the room carefully, checking every corner, but I was definitely alone. The clock read 3:43 a.m. The entire episode had lasted less than half an hour, though it had felt like hours. I got up and walked around the apartment, turning on every light, checking every room. Everything was secure, normal, untouched. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed, that some boundary had been crossed. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, drinking coffee and researching sleep paralysis on my laptop. I read about the hallucinations, the feeling of a presence, the breathing difficulties. Everything I'd experienced was textbook sleep paralysis, a well-documented sleep disorder that affects millions of people. But knowing the scientific explanation didn't make it feel any less real. The memory of that breathing, those whispers, that sense of being watched and violated, remained as vivid as if it had actually happened. Because in that moment, in that state between sleeping and waking, it had been completely real to me. I've had several more episodes since then, and they're always different but somehow the same. Sometimes the figure is closer, sometimes farther away. Sometimes it speaks, sometimes it just watches. But it's always there, breathing with me, waiting for me to fall into that vulnerable state between consciousness and sleep. I've learned to recognize the warning signs now. The paralysis always starts the same way, with that crushing weight on my chest and the inability to move. When I feel it beginning, I try to stay calm, remind myself that it's temporary, that it will pass. But knowing what's happening doesn't make it any less terrifying when you're living through it. The worst part isn't even the fear or the helplessness. It's the feeling that something is studying you, learning about you, feeding off your terror. Whether it's a hallucination brought on by sleep paralysis or something more, the experience leaves you feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way that's hard to describe to someone who's never been through it. I still sleep in the same bed in the same room. I've considered moving, but I suspect it wouldn't matter. Whatever this is, whatever causes it, seems to be connected to me rather than the location. It's become part of my reality now, this thing that visits me in the space between sleeping and waking, watching me breathe, counting my heartbeats, whispering my secrets back to me in the darkness. Some nights I sleep peacefully, undisturbed. Other nights, I feel it approaching as I start to drift off, and I know I'm in for another visit from my paralyzed watcher. All I can do is endure it, wait for it to pass, and try to remember that eventually I'll be able to move again. But I never forget that it's out there, waiting for the next time I'm vulnerable, the next time my consciousness slips into that liminal space where nightmares feel real and the impossible becomes possible. And when that happens, it will be there, breathing with me, watching me, reminding me just how powerless we really are when we're alone with our fears in the dark.